Let's move along here to Anthony. Hello, Anthony. Thanks for coming on a little bit early.
Absolutely, Bart. Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
Things are well. Things are very well.
All right, so where are you playing out of here?
Playing out of the Horseshoe Casino in Tunica, Mississippi.
Tunica, another place that I have not been to. Okay, and what's the size of the game?
It's a 2-5 game with a $1,000 cap.
Oh, nice. 2-5, 1,000 cap. Do they still play PLO down there?
Tons of PLO.
Okay.
That's the biggest game that plays in the room. Usually is a 5-5 PLO on a regular basis. And then occasionally when like circuit events are in town, you'll get bigger games in both Hold'em and in PLO.
Just a little poker history for all you youngsters out there. My understanding is that Tunica really was the only place that PLO was played on a regular basis up until, I would say, I started seeing it get trickled into commerce like maybe late 2000s, and really not like that long, maybe 2008, 2009, but I'd heard stories about PLO high at Tunica. So it's got a very, very rich history.
It was the only casino where you could really play poker like between Vegas and Atlantic City in the middle of the country for a long, long time, and PLO was a big featured game there.
And it was very loose, was my understanding.
Yes.
Okay.
Still is.
All right. So 2-5. Hopefully sometimes you pop into that game. I always try to encourage all my CLP subscribers that if you're in a bad no limit game, it's good to sort of diversify and at least be able to know how to play PLO, because a lot of times the types of players you want to play against, which are recreational, loose, losing players, have gravitated to PLO because they don't get crushed as much in the short term. They don't get punished as much for playing bad hands. Like they don't have to just fold. In the long term, you can easily make the case that the good players actually win more than they do in Hold'em. But that's where a lot of recreational money has sort of gone toward. All right, so 2-5 no limit, 1K cap, okay?
Yes, there's a $10 non-mandatory but very, very commonly applied straddle. It's a Mississippi straddle, so you can straddle from anywhere, but almost always it's the button. And I would say 9-handed, we're probably straddling 7 of the 9 players are straddling. So
okay,
pretty typical. And the button then has last option on all streets. So pre-flop, range of stacks all over the place. Most people are in the $1,000 plus range. The final villain effective stack is mine. The villain covers me at around $950.
All right, so $950 effective, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Small blind folds under the gun.
So button straddle on.
Yes, button straddle's on.
Okay.
I'm on the button. Small blind folds. Big blind calls. UTG calls. Middle position calls. Hijack calls. Cutoff calls. So all of them are into limp. The hero checks his option on the button with Jack of Spades, 8 of clubs.
So hero on the button, Jack of Spades, 8 of clubs, and we'll call it big blind completes and then like 4 limpers. And
1, 2, 3, 4, yes.
And hero on the button for 10, right?
Yep.
Checks.
Yep.
Jack 8 off, okay.
Yep, so $60 in the pot and 6 to the flop.
Mm-hmm.
Flop comes 8 of spades, 7 of diamonds, 2 of hearts.
8 of spades, 7 of diamonds, 2 of hearts. So hero has top pair.
Yes. Checks to the middle position player who bets 25.
MP bets 25, okay.
The hijack folds. The cutoff, who's ridiculously loose, calls. Hero calls.
All right, so hold on. So fold. So MP bets 25, fold, cutoff, who you said is loose, right?
Yes.
Calls.
Yes.
And now it's on the hero. And I mean, that's interesting what you added about the cutoff being like very, very loose, because I was going to say, like, there are certainly situations here. Well, the pot's only $60. There are certainly situations where if a guy bet, like, and this is really the only time you'd ever find to have this specific hand, right? In this situation, button straddle, right? So you just check your option. On 8-7 deuce, if a guy bet, if they were both somewhat solid players, especially if the cutoff, I think, was somewhat of a solid player, you could make a case here for just folding. Now, I know the pot's 110 and it's 25 to call, and you probably could find... See, it's interesting because, like, with the types of hands that might be V-pipped with an 8 in it, right? Or like ace-8, 10-8, 9-8. Of course, you're losing the 7-8, maybe like slivers of 6-8. It's kind of where your hand falls. I mean, you are ahead of 10-8 and 9-8, and you are getting pot odds. I'm just saying that maybe versus a little bit of a larger bet and 2 solid players and a call, I might just I might just pitch here. Like if you had 9-8, it's even more of a fold just because of kicker issues. This one's a little bit in between. I don't know if you ever considered folding. It sounds like it's a really loose game.
Yeah, I didn't think about folding in this particular situation,
Mhm.
primarily because the cutoff was giving money away. And so I was fine to continue on to a future street with position the whole way. I will say the middle position player had been seemed pretty competent. I'd only been at the table for about an hour. I'd played with him maybe once or twice previously, but not for very long stretches. Pretty aggressive guy, like bets in a variety of places, but had never really not ended up showing down the nuts or close to the nuts. So he was not a guy I wanted to take too lightly, but at the same time, he was very happy to get into pots, in particular with the cutoff as well. Like I think everyone was happy with that situation.
So you call, does everybody else fold?
Yes, the other two players fold.
So folds around. All right, so 75 here on the flop, 135. By the way, anytime I get any, and I know it's not that common, I would say at 2-5 plus, but anytime I get hands like this, I really like limped pots because I think there's a lot of things that you can do. Now, if we're all solid players, right, playing for profit, you don't usually get into situations where there's limp pots unless you're in the big blind, right? Or in this case, like Anthony here, he's in the straddle and he checks his option. But there's a lot of finagling that you can do in limp pots. Like I said, they're not all that common. Although I got to tell you, when I go play daytime encore at 2-5, when I went last week, and I think this week I'm going in on Wednesday, there's still a lot of limp pots. I mean, you're not going to see them at 5-10. And a couple of things about limp pots is that players don't like to go broke in limp pots. They usually will you can get them off of one pair hands at a certain point and just sort of like kind of sussing out what certain actions mean on certain textures in limp pots, I find somewhat interesting. And we used to have a lot of limp pots at 5-10 commerce. All right, so 135 here on 8-7 deuce with hero having jack 8 on the button. Okay.
Yeah, and one thing about that limp pot note that I know you say you don't really like the button straddle. Here, it has no action killing effect in Tunica, none, and it is pretty constantly limped a fair amount with that $10 straddle.
Well, if everyone's straddling and everyone's gonna straddle from the button, then I'll straddle from the button too. You know what I mean?
Pretty good. It's less EV than anywhere else, I guess.
The thing that I think is a killer in these games with button straddles is like if there's one guy that's like button straddling, and people have made this argument before, like it's still negative EV for that button straddle because he's putting in more money dead. Whether that's true or not, it probably does have a good shot to be true, just the extra dead money as a random. It still doesn't change the fact that it will kill the game a lot. But obviously that's not the setup here. All right, so 135 here to the turn.
Yep, so the turn comes in a 4 of clubs.
All right, so I mean it brings in 5-6, right? Total rainbow board, and that might be a hand that someone's calling or betting with on the come. 8-7 deuce 4, okay.
And middle position, the guy who led the flop bets $50, and the cutoff folds.
So MP bets 50, cutoff folds, splashy guy folds, and now it's 185.
Yes.
And it's 50 for you to call. So
yes.
This is just kind of like basic stuff here. I mean, the way that I would look at this would be, especially now, because it's much, much more complex when it's multi-way, when you're trying to figure out equity and like, pot odds and things like this. I mean, this is pure like, I'm getting 3.5 to 1 here, right? Because he bet 50 into 135. So it's 185. It's 50 for me to call. And the way I would look at this is like, do I have 22% equity versus this MP's action right now? And that's not necessarily like, do I have the best hand 22% of the time? It's also too like, is my equity, sometimes I might actually be able to improve some of the time here as well. And I mean, I could see a guy betting 8-9 or 10-8 here. Enough where you could make that case where you're good here 1 out of 4.5 times. The only thing that concerns me now is 5-6 comes in. He doesn't seem to be scared of that. And ace 8 you're losing to. So put it this way. Like if he came out and bet like 110 here, could you make a case for folding with no draw out there on the front door side? Maybe. But again, I mean, it kind of sounds like this is a very, very sort of loose, splashy game.
It is. And in fact, I actually think with this particular villain, had he bet in the, 100 plus range, kind of in that maybe a little bit around 2/3 plus of the pot, I probably would have folded. I would have found the fold here because I just don't think he's betting big without at least beating Jack 8. Like I just don't think that's likely given this.
If he had bet larger.
Yes.
Okay.
But given he bets smaller, I felt like there is chance he's still betting a draw, as an example, like 9-10. Could he be betting there? It's possible. Like he'd still try to keep somebody around, almost like trying to build a pot to maximize value against the cutoff, who he knows is not going to raise. The cutoff never raised unless the cutoff had the absolute stone cold nuts. So
right. You get into situations here too, sometimes in limp pots where, you can make this call and expect it to get checked to you a lot if a guy's betting range doesn't sort of fall into some very, very strong hands. And then you can get very curious if a guy like say you call again here and the river's a king or a queen, and then the guy bets again and you're like, what is this guy betting here? Like, is it like 2-pair plus? But I will point out that 5-6 might be a part of that, although you do have some 9-10, portions of that. By the way, too, one of the great things about this is that if you were MP, knowing what I just said, where the button Anthony's spot might get curious if the river's like a king or a queen. If you were the MP and you bet 25 and then bet 50 with ace-8 suited, and the river is an offsuit high card that has no connection whatsoever to the board, like a king or a queen, you should bet ace-8. I mean, you should bet ace-8 here for value. The only time that I would check that is if I thought that there was more value in trying to get a guy to bluff like 9-10 or 9-6. There's actually more value in me checking to check call to induce a bluff. But in these spots, even having an 8 in my hand, if I had ace-8, I would tend to just go for a bet, like if the river was an offsuit queen, if I was your opponent in the MP. But you don't see that often, which is why you can actually call down sometimes lighter. So cutoff fold, hero calls. Okay.
yes. Yep. And so we're at 235 now.
Yep.
Onto the river. And the river comes the 4 of diamonds.
All right. So 8, 7, deuce, 4. And now the river's a 4. By the way, if I'm saying I'm betting ace-8 on a queen or a king, am I going to bet ace-8 on a 4 at the end? 100, yeah, of course. That's even a better. I mean, the 4 has no connection really with anything here.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so he checks.
Okay, so villain. So MP checks.
Yes.
Okay.
And I bet for value. I'm trying to get a little bit of thin value here. I'd been doing so throughout. And once he checks after betting pretty small on both previous streets, I feel like it's possible that I'm going to get called by some ace-high hands. Is possible, though unlikely. I do think there are some weak 8s that will make a call there. But again, maybe unlikely.
What ace? Wait a minute. What ace-high hands get here like this?
Like if you had, let me think, because I'm trying to think about what I was thinking about during the hand. It wasn't ace-high hands.
I mean, here's the thing. I mean, the only, I think this is pretty, I mean, I'm all for thin value here, Anthony. This is pretty thin here. So, it kind of goes back to like, you had said like, maybe he's like, maybe he was betting like a hand like 9-10, right? Or something like that, which is say he's got 9-10 and he just gives up now at the end. Well, then you're not going to get called by that. So really you'd be targeting like 9-8 and 10-8 here, which maybe you would get, maybe you would get called by that. It's just kind of interesting, like how sometimes people in limp pots too, another thing, when the board pairs, they get kind of iffy. Like it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't be shocking if this guy actually had like ace-8 here. And then I mean, a guy should never like be checking like 5-6 here, but I've seen it though before. So you're really because he bet the flop. and then he got called by two people. I know the cutoff's very, very splashy. And then he bet the turn and you called. So, and now he checks the river. So I do find that that's probably going to be like some sort of medium strength showdown value, like an 8-ish hand or 9-10 that's just, whiffed. And the question is, how, does he always do this with 10-8 or 9-8? You beat those. And I do think you would get called by those hands, by the way. Like, I think people are like, he's never calling with 9-8. Bullshit. No, you're going to get called by 10-8, 9-8 if you size correctly. But how much ace-8 does he have here? Him betting. And again, like, is he betting twice? 8, 9, and 10-8 here. This is my thought in limp pots. I don't know if those continue to bet turn when they get called by two people when 5-6 comes in here on the turn. So we can do all the counting of combos, but it would be way more likely, I think, that he actually shows up here with ace-8, way more leaned towards than like 10-8 or 9-8, which are the hands that you're trying to, get value from. And then, if it's such a loose, crazy, like limp happy game, could he show up with like queen 8 suited, king 8 suited? I might check this one back. Now, on the flip, on the front door, like if it was a front door flush draw that busted out, and maybe in a slightly different situation, I'm all for making very, very thin value bets because people just convince themselves all the time that you busted out on a front door flush draw. But on this specific situation, I might just check this one back here. Unless like somehow like you, again, this is something that it's so rare. I mean, once in a great while you get into a situation where you think a guy might have just busted out a draw and you're trying to get him to raise you on a draw, but that's a very, very rare, situation. So,
I mean, maybe a 7, but I don't know if a 7 bets the first two streets.
Yeah, when two people call on the turn. So you bet.
I did. So I bet 85, and I actually, thinking about the hand afterward, I thought maybe it was too thin, and ultimately maybe not so much thin as not thinking about what he would call me with that I beat. It was more just clicking, which now I feel really bad about. But the villain thinks for about 5 or 6 seconds and check raises 500.
Well, that's interesting. So MP raises to 500. And are you, so, man, I don't know what you did, but are you moving past the just snap muck sort of button in your head because he's doing this on a paired board? Like if he had, you would find it strange that he would do this on a paired board?
I found it super strange that it was both a paired board. I found it strange that he would check to me on the river with, and like the fact that he didn't bet bigger on the turn if he had flopped the set and now has a boat. Why would he bet small on the turn? Like you'd want to pile money in, or at least check the turn, see if somebody stabs at it and check raise the turn. I couldn't think about what hand here check raises for value, like not for value. I couldn't think about what hand he would have that would do that in such a way and expect me to bet.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate with you. If he knew that you were going to bet as thin as Jack 8, why couldn't he do this with like pocket deuces or pocket 7s?
Yeah, no, very true.
Right? Because if you have an 8 that's going to, so, what concerns me from your, if I had a really thick value hand from your, if I was your opponent, right? And I had like deuce deuce, or somehow I'd limped along with 7-7, or God forbid I had 7-8 here or something like that. Or even if I turned 5-6, if I know that the guy on the button actually bets thin, the reason why I don't like to go for a check, because you look at this situation, like if you're in a situation where somebody's a thin value better and they might bluff like 9-10, then the play here with a thick value hand on the river would be to check, because you're going to get the thin value bet anyways. Maybe the guy even gets curious, and then you might get the bluff. But the problem is, in reality, is that people don't actually make thin value bets. So usually the better approach from your villain's perspective is just to bet, because you don't want the guy to check back like an 8, especially if you unblock an 8, like if you had 5-6 or deuce-deuce or 7-7 here. I mean, I personally, Anthony, like my snap fold sort of light in my head did not get past the fact that it was a paired board, I would probably just kind of snap fold here. It's just one of these population types of things where I don't think it's all, I think you are probably going an extra level and you might out-level yourself a little bit here if you overthink this and think, well, why would he check this if he had a strong hand? I mean, you got to sort of get past that and then just realize that it's a very sort of underbluffed spot and that he would have to have some sort of really like give up hand that now all of a sudden he's going to turn into a bluff. And then I wonder the whole sort of theory of river check raise bluffing, you're supposed to take some medium strength hands that you can win. This is from your villain's perspective, where if you check and your opponent checks behind, you win. But then when your opponent bets, you realize, oh, it's probably a raise or a fold, or a raise shows a higher expectation than a call. So I don't know. I would be surprised if he just all of a sudden does this with 9-10. Because why wouldn't he just, if he wanted to bluff with 9-10, why wouldn't he just come out and bet? You know what I'm saying? With like 9-10. So
yeah. The things for me that I was just kind of like, it just threw me off, I guess, and I was thinking through is did the fact that I bet 85 into a pot of 235, could that have induced him to think I'm weak? I have no idea.
I don't think your bet is really that small in a limped pot, and I just think that the fact that people tend to be somewhat strong when they bet in this, somewhat strong being like some hand that they're going to bet here anyways because they're checking behind all the in-between hands. So I guess what I would say is that 95% of the people here that bet in your spot on the river are actually going to have a stronger hand than what you show up with here because you're really at the bottom part. So I would find it just population-wise hard to believe. I don't think this is a great spot for the villain to just suddenly turn up with an airball bluff when people in your spot actually have stronger than what you actually have here. Like I said, I'm all for making thin value bets. So what ended up happening? What did you do?
Yeah, in the end, I just felt I was not in a good spot often enough to make a call. And so I did fold and decided to wait for a better spot. He did not show in the immediate, but about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, he was cashing out. I actually bought some chips off of him as he was walking away. And he said that he had 5-5 that he turned into a bluff on the river.
5-5 that he turned into a bluff. Well,
that's what he said.
It says 5-5. Now, if you look at this, if we just saw the river, we somehow didn't know the action beforehand. When I went back to sort of check raise bluffing theory, what I would, sometimes you take like a medium strength hand and you turn it into a bluff because sometimes it will go check, check. Like, if he checks 5-5 and you check behind with 9-10, he wins, right? But, and I never say this too, if I was sitting at the table, not in the hand, let's say you asked the guy, what did you have? And he said, I had 5-5. I would almost start laughing. I wouldn't try to laugh out loud, but go back to like the action I just don't look at the flop and the turn action.
Yeah.
He's betting 5-5 on 8-7 deuce into two people. And then he's betting the turn on a 4 after two people call him. And then he goes, and by the way, too, like I said, most people in your spot, Anthony, are way stronger when they bet in your spot. So if he somehow ended up with 5-5, which is like a very, very weak hand, if you are somewhat polarized, meaning like you've missed 9-10, or you have a strong hand that's not bet folding, it would be terrible to turn 5-5 into a bluff. He'd have to be like Mike Postle-esque for him to know that you're betting here with Jack 8 plus, right? To make 5-5. I don't believe the guy, but I did think it was interesting because it went through some limped pot scenarios. I do think that the river bet, like I said, I'm all for thin value betting, is a little bit thin for the reasons that I talked about. But yeah, I would think twice about folding. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it.